There's an interesting quote in that movie called The House I Live In, where one of the journalists that's speaking there says, "You have to understand that the war on drugs has never been about drugs." So I totally agree with that. I think it's a war that has many agendas, but I don't really think drugs is the biggest part of the agenda. Yes, I'm James Kilgar. I work at the Center for African Studies, but I also do some work in the community around issues of criminal justice and mass incarceration with the Champaign-Urbana Citizens for Peace and Justice and Citizens with Conviction, which is a group that advocates for the rights of formerly incarcerated people. I think it's a political agenda that has many prongs, but I think two are most important. The first is that I think it's kind of a moral crusade that is targeted at empowering police and security within our country, and that it's a big way of promoting a philosophy of tough on crime and lock them up and throw away the key, which ends up then in keeping people out of which ends up making people unable to actually live peacefully in their communities because of the activities of the police. Then I think there's a second part of the war on drugs, which is that it's highly racialized, and that is that African Americans in particular, in the first 2 decades of the war on drugs, have been disproportionately affected by arrests, by incarceration, by the by the mandatory minimum sentencing laws, and particularly by the disproportionate sentencing of crack cocaine, which is identified as a largely African American drug, and the sentencing for that at the federal level was 100 times greater than a sentence for the same amount of powder cocaine, which is identified as a drug largely used by white consumers. So I think those two things, that it heightens the legitimacy and the resources that go to security, and that it has a disproportionate impact on African Americans in particular, are really the problems with the war on drugs. And it hasn't gotten rid of drugs. If anything, we probably have more drugs now than we did at the beginning, but we spent billions of dollars trying to fight this useless and ineffective war. Well, I think that's a part of it. I mean, if you take away economic opportunities, if we look at Chicago, which is probably the classic example in the United States of a city that has just closed 49 schools, largely in communities of color. How is that a step forward for the development of those communities? How is that a step forward to giving young people in those communities any kind of opportunity to be able to succeed in the economic world? In a lot of communities, the people who are prospering are people who are involved in criminal activity. So there's definitely a direct connection between the two, and then that criminal activity also builds up a life of its own, so that there becomes a whole culture that keeps that thing going. I met someone last month who spent 39 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. Now, how in the world is somebody supposed to come out of prison when they went inside before there was even a cell phone? How are they supposed to come out and find their way? I think it would be great and absolutely necessary to take thousands and thousands of the people who are locked up for nonviolent drug offenses to get them out of prison and get them back onto the streets. But the only way that's going to be successful is that there also has to be an investment of resources into the communities where these people have come from, because these communities are now under-resourced and they're not actually able to handle the reentry of the people returning into those communities with the minimal resources that remain. So this involves a whole process of redistribution of wealth and resources. Let's spend less on corrections, let's get those people out, but let's not pitch people out in the street with, as people get now in Illinois Department of Corrections, $10 at the gate. They give them $10 and they're supposed to find their way into a new life with $10 in their pocket.